السيدات والسادة، نختتم جلساتنا لهذا اليوم بجلسة حوارية لمشاركة الرؤى حول مؤتمر الأطراف كوب 28 بعنوان أهم توجهات تقنيات المناخ في المستقبل. يديرها أندرو زولي، الرئيس التنفيذي للتأثير في شركة بلانيت.
Ladies and gentlemen, our last session for the day is going to start now. The COP28 Insights panel titled Uniting for COP28, Leveraging Technology and Defining the Climate Technology Future is moderated by Andrew Zolli, Chief Impact Officer of Planet.
السيدات والسادة، نبدأ الجلسة الحوارية بكلمة رئيسية يلقيها معالي ماجد السويدي، المدير العام والممثل الخاص لرئاسة دولة الإمارات لمؤتمر الأطراف كوب 28.
Ladies and gentlemen, the session will start with a keynote from His Excellency Majid Al-Suwaidi, Director General and Special Representative of the UAE COP28 Presidency.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here with all of you. My team are furiously working over at the expo site, and I was happy to leave and come and talk to people about technology. I dodged the construction, I managed to get through the security, and we made it here on time. So it's a pleasure and an honor to be with you. And of course, I want to thank the Dubai Future Foundation for providing this opportunity. I was telling them earlier, and I'm saying this on purpose in front of everybody, I'm their biggest fan. I think that they are at the forefront of what the UAE is about, and they represent everything that the UAE is about in terms of innovation, in terms of being part of the future. And I think that they are all about what the COP is about, what COP28 should be about. And so I want to thank them all for their work. I want to express my thanks to our wonderful panelists that we have, David, Sabrin, Asya, and all of those who are involved in the discussions, who represent a wealth of depth and knowledge and expertise in climate technology. They are our friends and colleagues. They represent many of the great things that are going on in the UAE and our great partners as well. And I want to thank you all for being part of this discussion. We are all aware that the first global stocktake of the Paris Agreement has revealed that we are behind our climate goals. And the science tells us that the window is rapidly closing, and our chance to reduce emissions by 2030 is escaping us. But the stocktake is more than just a review. It's also an opportunity for us to lay out how we can accelerate ambition and action to bridge those existing gaps. In response, the COP28 Presidency has developed an action plan to target key efforts around the energy transition, climate finance, adaptation, and resilience, building across nature, health, food, and water, and to underpin everything with full inclusivity. The surge of solutions, declarations, and initiatives that we are working towards with partners and parties aim to course correct before our window closes. But we need decisive action and commitment to partnerships, and we need technology and innovation to make it happen. But let me be clear, the current growth and development of climate tech is not sufficient to achieve 1.5 degrees C. We need more breakthrough technologies for deeper decarbonization. We need more investments and R&D to bring down costs for existing and emerging technologies. That's why technology and innovation sit across everything we do at COP28 as a cross-cutting theme alongside inclusion, frontline communities, and finance. Technology and innovation make a 1.5 degrees C, or I should say a less than 1.5 degrees C future possible. The good news is that most technologies to achieve 1.5 degrees are already available today. Electrolysis for hydrogen production, for example, or batteries or thermal storage for energy storage, or point source carbon capture and direct air capture. But they're not necessarily accessible or affordable enough at this stage. And the reality is 30% of the required CO2 abatement will still need to come from novel climate technologies. So we must accelerate the innovation and commercialization of early-stage technology. That's why COP28 seeks to mobilize climate tech ecosystems. It will bring together governments, business, academia, investors, and startups to accelerate global climate action, especially those of you in the private sector, which is an engine of innovation, resources, and expertise. We need you to build coalitions and partnerships to accelerate solution adoption and contribute to the ecosystem we're building. Today, there is significantly more capital for basic research and development and more venture capital for climate tech startups in heavy emitting sectors. As a result, we are seeing once nascent technologies becoming available and ready to be scaled, from sustainable aviation fuel to green steel. And an interest of inclusion and equity, we also must rebalance climate tech investments. Today, only 25% of investment goes to the global south. And we must accelerate tech innovation and rebalance investment, or else we simply lack the technology and adoption to keep 1.5 within reach. That's why COP28 is spearheading initiatives to leverage technology and innovation to accelerate climate action. First, our Technology and Innovation Hub in the Green Zone, to spotlighting cutting-edge technologies shaping the future of climate. And I assume I will see all of you inside that hub at some point over the coming days. Together with Breakthrough Energy, we're hosting the Climate Innovation Forum on December 1st, which will bring together technology, heavyweights, and rising entrepreneurs around future-focused innovation. Our partners, New Energy Nexus and McKinsey, have launched 2 climate tech accelerators to build capacity and support about 250 startups hyperscale their solutions. And earlier this month, we announced the launch of the Innovation for Climate Tech Coalition. Along with anchor partners, Tencent, Masdar City, The Catalyst, and 26 additional partners to help connect startups, scale-ups, corporates, investors, and knowledge contributors in climate tech. Finally, we are pleased to co-organize a high-level event on December 8th with the UNFCCC Technology Mechanism to enhance international cooperation on technology development and transfer. I'm excited about what is ahead of us and what can be achieved together at the intersection of climate, technology, and policy. I look forward to seeing you all at COP28 in just a few short days. I thank you for listening to me, and I look forward to the discussions of our wonderful panel, and let's give them all a round of applause. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Yeah? That's great. Hi, everyone. Or no? You can't hear me? Yes, now? Otherwise, I will do this as interpretive dance, and it cannot be unseen. I want to welcome you all to 5:06 p.m., the peak learning hour of the day, as you all know. This is the asymptotic minima between the period you last ate and you will next eat. And for those of us experiencing jet lag in particular, you may experience spontaneous narcolepsy And we appreciate you struggling through. Clearly the world's, I mean, this is about, I fear for the future if this particular coalition of people something were to happen, but clearly you've all demonstrated that the world's futurists are the world's hardiest bunch. So it's really great to have you all here today. And I think it's worth taking a moment, you know, to just situate ourselves before we get into this really extraordinary group of people we have gathered, and that is my honor to moderate today. We are here at a moment when, on the verge of these climate negotiations, when it feels like we are stuck between something like the sixth extinction and the second renaissance. Sort of, you know, problems that are bigger than our brain's ability to imagine, and capacities that are hard to think about at scale. And certainly the ones that are really coming and moving, really independent of the movements of these negotiations, so many of those really profound movements are in technology. Indeed, that's, and I would say, hi, I'm Andrew Zolli, I'm the Chief Impact Officer at Planet. I work in that field, so it's my honor to see that work every day. And how we take these self-compounding, self-accelerating, transformational technologies and weave them into global consensus so that they are accelerated to the right places, that they show up in the right ways, is the work of our panelists today. So I'd like to just introduce them briefly to all of you. We've been having fantastic conversations backstage, which I know will continue. First of all, to my immediate left is Sabrin Rahman, the Director of Partnerships for the COP28 Presidency. Next to her is Asya Al-Shehhi. I'm sorry, I'll apologize about that. Asya Al-Shehhi, who is the Negotiator for Technology, Science, and Innovation for the COP28 Presidency. And finally, David Livingston, who's Senior Advisor and Managing Director for Energy to the U.S. Special Presidential Envoy for Climate here on behalf of the United States. So we have both the UAE and the U.S. here represented on the panel. And before we dive into the substance, because we're going to have about half an hour to really dig into these questions, I'd want to start actually with you, Asya, if you wouldn't mind. This is just a very personal thing. You know, climate negotiators are, I don't know, an obscure bunch. Like we all come here and we're here really in support of these negotiations. You have a seat at that table, and I'm absolutely fascinated. Just how did you come to be in this work? What's your background? Like, tell us about what it's like to actually be a negotiator and how you came to do it.
Thank you so much. I didn't see that coming, actually. So I'm very passionate about technology, and it started since I was a kid, where I just assemble the computer pieces, and then my father be like, okay, our future engineer. And then when I started working, I was literally behind the black screen where all geeks with the coding and 0-1s, and this was my passion. So people thought maybe she don't have the human skills. But it was very interesting for me, the sustainability field. I'm a diver, so I appreciate our environment. I love the fishes. And I think all of us are responsible of how we can leave an impact or how we can add something to our environment. And every individual act actually very important. So I started in climate negotiations, and I'm actually very lucky to be part of an extraordinary team of negotiators where 70% of the team is from youth below 35 years. I actually have two of my colleagues here, Abdulaziz and Meitha.
There's one over there.
Negotiations team.
I find it amazing, 70% of your negotiating team are youth, come from the youth.
This is exactly what the presidency means when we talk about youth empowerment.
Yeah.
And here you can see it by actions. And the capacity being built for this team, and this is something that even been witnessed by parties since we received this COP28 file until today, and we're very excited to what we can accomplish and the COP28 outcomes.
I really appreciate it. I want to say to you that, I don't know, all of you got these bags full of notepads. This is the standard stuff you get often at conferences, but there's also this pack of cards. Did you see the pack of cards? Some of you had the pack of cards. No? I don't think it was a speaker. Oh, and it was from UN Global Policy, and it like the first one. I split them open last night, and the very first thing it said was like, "How are your foresight practices? How are your futures practices informed by the voices of young people?" And I just think it's amazing to see that that's actually happening here. But let's go around. I want to get everybody into the conversation, and we really are going to try and keep it a conversation. So, David, let me come to you. You know, when at least I'll say in our country, in the United States, if you pick a random person off the street and ask them about climate tech, they're likely to point at things like windmills and electric cars, the sort of like standard stock photos of things we think about. But so much of the technology conversation here is in places that you wouldn't think of, first and foremost, like agriculture. I know that you've been intimately involved in some of that work, and not just in agriculture, but in hard-to-abate industries. And could you talk a little bit about sort of like the horizon scan of those technologies and how you've been working on them?
Well, Andrew, thank you. It's a great question, and it's a ideal place to be talking about that, actually, because when our office was created at the beginning of the Biden administration back in 2021, one of the very first things that we created was with the UAE, and it was one of the very first initiatives that came out of our office of the U.S. government on climate, and it was something called the Agriculture Innovation Mission for Climate. And it was a recognition of that fact, that we need to diversify the way that people think about climate tech. It's not just Tesla cars and solar panels and wind turbines, but it's also the food tech and ag tech innovations. It's also innovations in hard-to-abate sectors, like molten oxide electrolysis in steel, or like inert anodes in aluminum smelting. And in the ag space, we created this Agriculture Innovation Mission for Climate. We called it AIM for C. And it's been a tremendous success in just a couple of years. AIM for C has now mobilized $13 billion of new investment commitments from governments and private sector towards climate-smart agriculture innovation. It has created countless different innovation sprints, as we call them, public-private partnerships that are taking some of that rising tide of investment in climate-smart agriculture and putting it towards very specific breakthrough areas where we need to make progress. Things like electrifying farm equipment, things like bringing photovoltaics into agricultural systems, not only for off-grid energy, but also for smart shading, what's called agrivoltaics today. Things like nitrogen-fixing microbes and organisms that can reduce our need for fertilizer by actually naturally fixing nitrogen. Or smarter, more climate-smart crops, lower carbon fertilizer, new things that we feed cattle to reduce enteric methane emissions. The list goes on, right? All of these should be as exciting of climate tech opportunities as anything else that exists in the power sector that we think of so often. We now count more than 66 countries. We count hundreds of different philanthropies, NGOs, businesses that are taking part in this. So I'm very proud of what the UAE and the United States have achieved together with AIM for C. The UAE is also a government partner in another major flagship public-private initiative we've had to try and bring in the private sector in a new way, something called the First Movers Coalition. It's essentially a buyer's club for green products in hard-to-abate sectors, like the industrial sectors I mentioned, steel, aluminum, cement, and as well as transport sectors, shipping, aviation, trucking, those hard-to-abate sectors. And what we realized was there are more and more supply incentives out there, things like the Inflation Reduction Act, policy incentives here in the UAE, what Europe is doing and in other geographies. But we need demand as well in order for those projects to actually get off the ground, get financing, get a first shovel going in the ground. So to break through the chicken and egg problem, we went to some of the largest companies in the world, Fortune 500 companies, and we said, are you willing to commit that a certain amount of, let's say you're an automaker, and the steel you purchase in the year 2030 onwards will be green steel, 10% maybe, starting in the year 2030 and upwards from there will be green steel, and moreover, that you're willing to pay a green premium for it. It's one of the highest leveraged things that a company can do, actually, to transform their industry is say, I am willing to pay a green premium up front to buy down the cost of the greener alternative. And by these companies taking leadership with their own balance sheets, we now have the single largest green product demand signal in world history. $15 billion worth of green demand across those sectors from nearly 100 of the world's largest companies. So it's just another example of how we're working with other like-minded governments like the United Arab Emirates, many different partners in Europe, Japan, India, and others, as well as with bringing in the private sector in a new way, recognizing that no single company, no single government is going to do this alone. We need nation states, which have been the traditional actors in these climate negotiations and in the COPs, to look after things within their own national borders. But we also need corporates and civil society actors that span global value chains. And those necessarily cross those national borders. And you need the complementarity of both of them in a matrix to really address this challenge. And we're delighted to have such terrific partners in Asya and Sabrin, in His Excellency, Ambassador Majid, who's done such a great job in helping us to advance some of these efforts as well. And I note that we also need the enabling sort of platform technologies too. I know we're going to talk a little bit more about AI. We need to get to a place where we think about turning compute into carbon reduction. We think about turning GPUs into GHG reductions, right? But also, Andrew, I know that things like what Planet are doing are also very important with that, right? You can't manage what you can't measure. You can't measure what you can't even see. And so satellite imaging and the eye that we have in the sky, so to speak, is helping us to better understand the functioning of our own planet as an organism and as a manageable climate challenge. So I wonder if maybe you want to say a thing or two about why Planet's in the business it is.
The tables have turned, my friend. I'll come back to Planet in a minute. I'd love to address that in a second, but I want to pick up on something that you and Your Excellency Majid mentioned, and that is this all together now moment. This moment when I don't know how many people in this room are veterans of the COP process, but for many years, they really were about a conference of the parties. They were really focused on government. And I think as we've gotten deeper into the Paris agenda, and over time, certainly it's so clear that we have to mobilize markets and we have to mobilize private sectors and governments and civil society organizations, all working together. And sometimes there are uneasy and complicated processes to kind of put those together. So with that in mind, I'd like to just welcome Sabrin into the conversation. So Sabrin, you're leading in this partnerships work. And I also note that you yourself came from a private sector background. It'd be useful maybe to share with everybody that part of your story and what it looked like sort of on the outside, working in the private sector and in finance in particular, and now what it might look like on the inside and the bridges that you are building.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I've spent the last almost 20 years in the private sector working in sustainable finance and sustainable development, and have been a long time sort of supporter and contributor to the COP process, but from a very different lens. And I think it's one thing to attend, almost participate from the sidelines, and it's very, very different to be in the engine room. And to Andrew's point, this is such a pivotal moment for the private sector because we're all very cognizant of the contributions as well as the responsibilities that the private sector has across all geographies and of all sizes. So David, to your point, it's not just the procurement power, the value chains, but it's also the innovation, the people power that all sizes of the private sector can really bring. And as a presidency, that's really what we want to leverage, right? We want to ensure that, yes, of course, the parties, the governments, they are the core sort of nucleus, but the stakeholders that surround it are very, very critical to ensuring that nucleus is well equipped. And so that is what I think, as somebody who's coming almost from the outside world, is very enthused by, because that's what we are mobilizing, and that's what we're harnessing. And I think for those who may be attending a COP either for the first time or who are long-term or long-time sort of supporters and attendees will notice something differently. So there are maybe two main differences. Number one, the physicality. So in the past, you may have seen the blue zone, which is where a lot of the negotiations and the diplomatic process take place, is often quite far removed from the green zone. This time, you'll see both as side by side, which shows how we are trying to bring it together, that there is that interconnectiveness and the complementarity of both these ecosystems. And also the action agenda of the COP28 presidency. Now, the action agenda is what you often refer to as non-negotiated outcomes. So we have quite a large and extensive and deep action agenda as the presidency. And all of these outcomes have a deep level of involvement of the private sector in helping develop, deliver, and also scale. We have to remember this is one moment in time. How will they live on? What is the legacy? What is the institutional framework that will help ensure that they have the impact beyond the life of COP28? So for us, that's what is incredibly important, and the private sector have a role to play in that.
It's interesting, you know, one of the things that I see a lot of, and I'd be very interested what people in this room see too, is in response to something that is existential, as existential as the reason that we have a COP in the first place, there is a kind of necessary blending of form. You know, because we need to interoperate with each other, we have governments that work with civil society organizations and civil society organizations that are becoming or adopting strategies of the private sector and private sector institutions that are adopting, you know, this is an example of this. I, a few years ago, met up with an ambassador from a European nation. He was the ambassador to Silicon Valley. He was not the ambassador to the United States. He was the ambassador to the tech ecosystem. He was poached by a large tech company in Silicon Valley to become that company's ambassador to the European Union. It's totally bananas, right? But it's a lot of people getting their chocolate and their peanut butter kind of like all mixed up. Like we're getting these new toasty s'more kind of combinations. I'm using American idioms, so I'm sorry. But there is this sort of necessary, it seems to me, kind of blending of structures, of institutional mandates. And maybe now I will actually just take the question that you asked, so I'm not deflecting. But so just to introduce myself, I'm Andrew Zolli. I'm the Chief Impact Officer of an organization called Planet. We are what's called a public benefit corporation, one of the very few that has gone from the startup garage to going public as a public benefit corporation. And we have designed, built, and operate the largest constellation of Earth-observing satellites in history, which collectively image the entire surface of the Earth every day in high resolution. And then we download 40 terabytes of Earth observation data a day and use AI techniques to extract essential signals, which we then convert back into assets that are used by, among many other actors, the very climate negotiators that you see here. One really extraordinary organization called Climate Trace, backed by the former Vice President Al Gore of the United States and Nobel laureate, brings together technical actors who, they do things like they monitor every coal-fired power plant on Earth from using satellite imagery to determine when those plants are turned on and off so they can extract the emissions signal that comes from those plants, which is not widely reported by most governments around the world. So, you know, technology is enabling an era, among many other things, the sort of straightforward actions we have to take toward emissions reductions starts by making the invisible visible. And I think an era of radical climate transparency is really being born in front of our eyes because of these technologies. And I think it's a particularly interesting because so much of it rests on really extraordinary volumes of data and the ability for us to leverage AI, because the mountains of data that we're able to now generate would be useless without it. So I want to turn that conversation back Let me go back to David on this question around this AI moment. And let me say that this is a question I'd love for your perspectives, all of us together, to weigh in on. You know, how are you thinking, David, about AI from the particular vantage point that you sit? And what are your hopes for it and your concerns about it?
Well, obviously AI is fundamentally, it's one of those things that is just, it's like the internet, right? It's not a sector, it's not a topic, it's a fundamental reshaper of the landscape across everything that we see. And I think, first and foremost, it also demands some humility. We, I think, are just at the very beginning of understanding, 1 or 2% of how AI and machine learning is going to play out and change the climate challenge and the climate opportunity set that we have. That being said, we're starting by trying to ensure that there is an inclusive conversation around AI and climate. One of my colleagues, Erwin Rose, is the chair of a UN body called the Climate Technology Centers Network, CTCN. And in his role at that advisory board, we've helped to stand up a new AI for Climate initiative in the summer of this year, in June. That has become the first UN body to have a forum to discuss, share knowledge, identify priority topics, identify areas for further research, encourage deployment, et cetera, of a panoply of different themes related to AI and climate. One of the very first instances in which there was sort of a concrete conversation had in person was actually at the Africa Climate Summit, right? Which I think is an important symbolic statement that the discussion on AI and climate needs to happen, not only, Andrew, in Silicon Valley, but it has to also be not just happen in, but start in the Global South. It has to be a conversation that brings in developing countries in the Global South to the table as equal stakeholders from the very get-go. And that's something that we're trying to push quite emphatically. We're also trying to think through, different ways and to sort of disaggregate this broader topic of AI and understand there are very different applications and very different relevancies, let's say, for large language models than for certain, more rudimentary machine learning approaches, than for deep learning approaches that are using, kind of broader and more complex neural networks. So also understanding and treating with sophistication the state of the art in the field of artificial intelligence, machine learning, the frontiers of computing, let's say, is extremely important if we're to treat the topic and the intersection of where that topic intersects with climate with the sort of maturity and sobriety that's needed, I think, to try and harness what can be an incredibly important tool in the best ways. Obviously, we also know that we're going to have to manage the increased energy load that might come from data centers and the like, but I think that the latest research that I've seen, there's a great paper that was just done by BCG and Google that suggests that if harnessed correctly, AI, even to the end of this decade, to 2030, could contribute 5 to 10% of GHG reductions globally, just in what it enables. So we're hopeful, and we're going to continue to try and push that forward in an inclusive manner with Global South at the table.
Let's wonder, Asya, do you have a thought on this topic? I want to bridge to a couple of other questions for you in particular, but I want to give you a chance to think to address the AI narrative as a negotiator.
Actually, AI is very interesting, and we've heard about the early warning systems, for example, in a lot of conversation when it comes to negotiations and developing countries' needs. Technology is a very interesting topic. It's a very interesting discussion to talk about, but what is most important is how we can operationalize it, how we can make sure it is delivering what it's supposed to deliver. So, for example, artificial intelligence, the COP28 is working to deliver a package of initiatives under the early warning for all system, which the UN Secretary General launched, and we will be delivering a stock take on the progress made. It's been implemented in 30 countries. What is the progress and how we can take this forward? So it is a very important topic. But speaking of data, it is very important to understand if we want impact, if we want action, we need to understand what we are going through. So we hear about the Paris Agreement goal, for example, and the 1.5 degree goal for not to exceed the 1.5. But what does it mean? It means we should avoid 22 gigatons of emissions before 2030, which means we need accelerated actions. And then comes the global stocktake, for example, that everyone is looking forward for.
Right.
All eyes in Dubai, how the global stocktake will look like. But we understand that it's a party-driven process. But it is three questions. What we've done before, where are we today, and what we are going to do. So accelerated climate action indeed will need the means of implementation. And under means of implementation, we have finance, technology, and capacity building. They are important individually, but must function together to ensure it delivers what it's supposed to do. Very interesting, for example, things that we've seen through the synthesis report of party submission for the global stocktake, through different consultations, enhancing international cooperation for technology development and transfer is crucial. For example, collaborative RD&D is something that must have some attention within the climate dialogue. So I think enhancing international cooperation could be a key for technology development transfer and capacity building. The COP28 is also committed to fixing climate finance. It's considered one of the most important pillars. But the GST should be ambitious and should be balanced across all pillars.
It's fascinating. I think about the kind of practical lens on the things that you described, both of you actually, in those answers. And I reflect on this story from our experience in the technology sector, working with the country of Brazil. So, protecting the Amazon from deforestation and reducing rates of deforestation is a global commitment made at COP26, actually, with really significant commitments there. The thing that's interesting about deforestation, if you look at the Amazon, is that you can literally watch it spread like a virus. But the leading indicator of where the deforestation is going to occur is the presence and the rapid creation of illegal roads. So you have imagine a large green mass of trees, right? If you see a road going in, and we can actually see the roads going in from space, that's the leading indicator that there's about to be a significant act of deforestation. So we, working with a Brazilian entity, supported the development of this tool, which takes all the satellite imagery continuously for all of Brazil and identifies using supervised machine learning techniques, using AI, actually finds those roads and those acts of illegal deforestation, and then automatically generates reports that are given directly to the environmental police. And as a consequence of those alerts, they have deployed now more than 150 raids, nearly 4,000 agents. They've collected more than $2 billion US in fines from illegal deforesters. And this year, the Brazilians will announce a nearly 50% reduction year on year in deforestation. That's data and AI connected to action. And it's interesting that one of the things that really resonates is all the cooperation that's required between those different pieces, the technology transfer from the global north to the global south. It can't be done on behalf of the global south by the global north, but it can be supported in that way. But also the really significant difference between the amount of this technology that you need for reporting versus the much faster, the sort of velocity of information and insight that AI can provide to enable efficient action, sort of much faster action loops, I think is one of the things that must be part of this discussion as we proceed.
You remind me of something very interesting I heard about from a colleague a few days ago. Like, with all the work we're doing, behind the scenes, preparing for the big day of the COP opening and then until the end with the great outcomes, she told me, like, COP is a puzzle, and it's like a 1,000-piece puzzle. Every piece is important. Yeah. So I believe every one of us play a role, and every one of us, either doing something small or big, it is a puzzle piece that the picture cannot be complete without it.
Well, I think you're absolutely right about that, and I think this is a moment of putting the puzzle pieces together. I'm going to ask you two questions because we've got about just a few minutes left. But Sabrin, I want to ask you, when this COP moment has passed, when COP28 has passed, and you return to the private sector or you begin to engage with the private sector differently, I'm not predicting your future employment. One question I would love to ask you is, if you could talk to the world's tech titans and glue them into a partnership framework around this work, what would you tell them? What is it that you think the partnership moment gives us?
Oh, that's a tough one. But look, I think the partnership moment for us and that aha moment for me during this process was just how significantly we harnessed the power, right, that all entities can really bring. So the coalition that Ambassador Majid spoke about in terms of the 30 large organizations, tech players that we were able to bring on board from the East, from the West, this will leave a legacy. So we've built quite a few coalitions that are being unveiled over the next few weeks. These are the things that I think will outlive the moment of COP. We're also bringing together and bringing to the forefront a lot of the challenges I think the private sector face within our own silos that have never been brought to the forefront of a discussion such as COP. So around, I know we were talking about AI and data, but around climate-related disclosures. This is something that every organization is struggling with. When it comes to, this is an annual problem we have. There are calls around greenwashing. Is your data clean? Is it verified? Is there third-party assurance? AI would make this a lot easier. It would be helpful for smaller companies. It would help disclosures from the global south, right? Because it's a labor-intensive process. And this is a topic that will be unpacked in the first ever Accountability Day. So there's a thematic day on accountability on December 4th, hand in hand with Trade and Finance Day. So there is a lot more focus on things that actually keep the private sector up at night because we need to understand the climate risks and opportunities from that lens as well.
Okay, well, I really appreciate that, and I'm going to play off your, I think about all the things keeping me up at night. Actually, the things keeping me up right now is about 15 cups of really delicious espresso I had outside. I want to leave us with one, and I just ask you to do this quickly as we're short on time. We're in this magnificent building, and literally in front of the world's brain trust of the world's most influential and thoughtful people working on the future from all over the world. Thinking ahead to 2071, let's say, I think we'd be on COP76 at that point in the process. Looking back on this moment from the future, I'd love to get just one thing from each of you that you could look back and say, at that COP, this is when we delivered this. Now, I want to say to the audience that is a complicated question for climate negotiators to answer because the negotiations haven't happened yet. And we want to be careful about not putting the cart before the horse. But I do think just as a general aspiration, like looking back from the future and backcasting to the present, maybe David, I'll start with you and ask you to come in this direction.
Sure. I'm actually going to rip up the script a little bit on what I was going to say, which is going to be maybe a more proper, a more politically correct answer. But I'm struck by reflecting on watching a few of the day's proceedings earlier in the day. And what I was struck by is, it may be obvious to probably everyone else in this room except me, but I realized that we're in the life extension business. There's so much discussion about one of the hottest sort of tech trends and areas of investment and attention in the future being life extension. That's exactly what we are engaged in at COP28. This will hopefully be the moment that we realize we're in the life extension business, not just for ourselves, but for a habitable planet. And so for all the care and attention that we will pay, that we do pay, and we will pay over coming years to the right diet, to the right exercise regimen, to the right medicines to be taking, to enhance skincare routines and regimens, right? To personalize medicine. Hopefully, we also, by the time that the 2070s rolled around, will have developed the perfect personalized medicine routine for the planet. And we will realize that our job is to preserve, not shorten, the habitable lifespan of the planet we live on. And if we do that, we will be a generation that's contributed to continuing prosperity and that's done our part.
Fabulous. Thank you. Asya, how about you? A hope for the COP.
This reminds me of when I started working on the technology, science, innovation track under negotiations. I literally designed an article article piece of how technology will look like in COP28. And the closer we get to the event, the closer and the clearer the vision gets, closer to what I thought of. So I think I will hope for the best through this conversation so that when we look back, this will be what we're going to meet. So I see COP28 as a COP that reignited hope, a COP that gave the keys, a COP of actions, a COP of all, and a COP that really showed the world what is the meaning of unite, act, and deliver.
What a wonderful thought. Thank you. And Sabrin.
I don't think I have much to add on top of those.
We've given you the
remarks.
hardest slot.
No, my goodness. Look, I think on behalf of all of my colleagues, I think if we were able to innovate and do things a little differently, we would have done something amazing, because I think the process is an incredibly difficult process. But with the spirit of the UAE and such an amazing team of colleagues, we want to ensure that we leave a legacy.
Well, I want to say thank you to His Excellency Majid and to all of you. We are all collectively rooting for you, for all of you to be successful in this extraordinarily important moment. And please join me in thanking this extraordinary panel of folks really delivering for humanity. So thank you so much. It's a pleasure. I think we're done.